Good afternoon and welcome everyone to Nevada Historical Society High Noon with Neil Cobb. Virginia City, the Great Fire, October 26, 1875, with Joe Curtis as our guest presenter. My name is Amanda and I'm with the Washoe County Library System. And now I'd like to introduce Sherry Hayes Zorn to the Nevada Historical Society. Welcome, Sherry.
Thank you, Amanda. And as always, thank you to the Washoe County Libraries for helping us put on these monthly High Noon lecture series. And thank you for everybody for attending today's lecture. We so appreciate people joining every month. And if you aren't able to, maybe you don't know that we have the videos on our website, as well as the Washoe County Library has it on their homepage as well. So if you can't make it today, you can see it in the future at any time. So without further ado, let me introduce Neil Cobb, our host and a longtime supporter here at the Nevada Historical Society. He's been a longtime supporter since at least 1988 and has done extensive lectures within the community about Nevada history and has definitely helped spread the word about our collection and how we help preserve Nevada's history. And he, of course, he is an honorary curator for us. So without further ado, let me introduce Neil Cobb. Hey, Neil.
Great. Thank you, Sherry. Very much appreciate the intro. Our speaker today sent me his bio, and I'm going to read it verbatim. He is not a braggart of any kind at all. He is kind of quiet, and unless he's doing a program, then he's not so quiet. But here's how it read. Parents moved to VC in 1958 when they opened the museum business in town. I was gone for college and the U.S. Army, returning in 72. Boom, end of it. I hate to tell you, Joe, but there's just a whole lot more to you. A volunteer fire chief up there, an author of many, many books, editor of others. He's worked as a deputy sheriff, owned the Mark Twain bookstore, has a huge collection of Virginia City photographs, most of them originals. He graduated from the San Jose State University, majored in criminal justice. Upon graduation, he took a job working for the FBI in the Las Vegas branch. But that was cut short when he got his draft notice in 1966, right dead in the middle of the Vietnam War. He served 4 years in the U.S. Army with 3 IDs and didn't wear a uniform. He can elaborate on that in the question and answer time. He's been featured in Time Magazine, the Smithsonian, the Nevada Magazine, and on the A&E channel. But the thing that I love best about what I found is one statement. What he's most proud of, especially being a Nevadan. Please welcome our speaker today, Mr. Joe Curtis.
Neil, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here because, as you mentioned, I give presentations on Virginia City, Comstock type history, all sorts of different subject matters to live audiences all the time. But I've never done one like this on a Zoom meeting. Yeah. So it's kind of weird being nervous about a Zoom meeting rather than standing up in front of folks who are potentially throwing tomatoes and that sort of thing. But yeah, I am. I'm very proud of being a Nevadan and was raised here, started out in Carson and came up, my parents came up here in the 50s into Virginia City. And it's been a lifelong love ever since then. I am, incidentally too, I am a life member of Nevada Historical Society. My mother registered me with the Nevada Historical Society when I was in high school, I think. And so that's another pride thing that I'm glad to do that, to be involved with that. So let me get into what we're here to talk about. And I was asked to talk about the Great Fire of October 26, 1875. And I really don't like the word lectures. I prefer the word presentations or discussions or talk, because usually in the live situations, we allow questions come through at any point in time. Lecture reminds me of sitting in a big hall with about 150 or other people listening to some professor drone on about a subject that was not particularly of all that interest. And so unfortunately, I've always been one to say these are presentations, and they generally are group presentations, questions at any time. That doesn't work this way, I guess. So anyway, we're going to talk about the Great Fire, October 26, 1875. It was here in Virginia City, and my sponsor, I guess you could say, is the Comstock Firemen's Museum in Virginia City, which is actually a 501c3 nonprofit museum, and was founded by 5 of us, myself and 4 other folks, members of the volunteer fire department in the late 70s. And all of the equipment is inside of it. It belongs to the county and is all original equipment from Virginia City. So what we'll talk about was, officially, I need to give you some oversight as to kind of what the fire service was all about in Virginia City, so that you have a better understanding of what is going on with the fire itself when that comes up. So there were a number of major fires preceding the Great Fire, and on an average factor, most fires involved at least 6 buildings at a time. And there were numerous buildings, because if you think about it, the lighting was all by coal oil lamps, candles, and what have you. And of course, those things are very difficult to manage if you are throwing your arms around in one way or fashion or another, or you knock something over and you end up with a problem. The very first fire in Virginia City was in 1859. And of course, that's the period of time when things are just getting started in Virginia City on the Comstock here. And it was fought literally with snowballs at a shack that caught on fire. And actually, at the Fire Museum, we sell it. One of our T-shirts that we sell there, that's what it says, fighting fires since 1860 with snowballs, and sell a lot of those. Most of the super serious fires were between that period of 1859 and 1942. Since 42, we've had some pretty good fires, some structure fires and so forth, but not fires that actually went on to engulf other neighborhoods or outside of that particular fire. We're fortunate that way. Here's a picture of a fellow by the name of Rosenbaum, and he had a furniture store on C Street, and this is one of the first known photographs of fires in Virginia City. And this one dates back into the early 1870s. Rosenbaum, it's interesting, is because that's a Jewish name, and a good many of the retail businesses in Virginia City in that period of time were owned by individuals of Jewish extraction. So you can see lots of smoke. You don't see much in the way of people fighting a fire or trying to do something with it. You do see some hoses on the ground. And that's because at that period of time, Virginia City actually had fire hydrants, and it had cisterns which were embedded into the intersections of each street as they crossed, and you could suck water from there. And we had pieces of equipment that would draw the water out of the cistern, and the water would go in and then be pushed out by pieces of equipment. Here's a photograph from another fire in Virginia City a little bit later on. And the piece of equipment you see down there is actually now in the Volunteer Fire Department's Fire Museum, Comstock Firemen's Museum. It's painted a different color, but it is that same piece of equipment that was there. Because at one time, there were as many as 18 different volunteer fire departments in and around Virginia City. So the equipment early on was very poor equipment. and it was inadequate in many ways. But the water was finally piped in here through a system that comes from Marlette Lake up by Lake Tahoe. Actually, it's about 1,000 feet above Lake Tahoe. That water comes down through a 12-inch pipeline that comes down through Washoe Valley, and then the pressure of that water going through that pipeline dropping forth approximately 2,000 to 3,000 feet pushes it back up to the mountains that in Mount Davidson, and comes around to Virginia City. So the pieces of equipment that are used to pump that water or even slow it down weigh a lot of weight, and you'll see what that has to do with it when we get to talking about the fire. In Virginia City, of course, we're 6,220 feet on the main street, and fire hydrants can, at one time before we had pressure reducer equipment, would push out over 200 pounds per square inch in a fire hydrant, which means that a man cannot hold that much more than about 80 to 90 pounds of pressure. So you have to have some way to cut down the equipment, the pressure. This particular equipment is also original Virginia City firefighting equipment, and we restored it. It was in my garage for about 7 or 8 months until I was told either that goes or I go by, I'm sure you know who that would be by. So we had to finish it up quickly, and we got it out and put it into the museum. It's an important factor to understand why the fire got away from the responders. One, there was wind, significant wind, a typical Washoe zephyrs, early morning, late at night, late afternoon. You've seen them all, and had to deal with them, tying down your trash cans and that sort of thing, which around here we call it playing, depending upon the amount of wind, we call it playing trash can bingo, because you're trading your fire hydrant, you're trading your trash cans with your neighbors a lot of the time. So the first pipeline that was completed actually was 18 inches, completed from Marlette to Virginia City in 1873. It's in a whole other story about how they got their water before that. The second pipeline was completed in 1875, just before the Great Fire, in the fall, just before the Great Fire. The third pipeline was completed in 1887, after the Great Fire and because of the Great Fire. So this map kind of gives you an aerial view. I think it must have been taken by an alien craft that was hovering over Virginia City at the time. But you see Washoe Lake out there. Lake Tahoe is way back in the background. I don't know if people can see my pointer that I point, but if you consider that Marlette Lake is kind of up at the top there, drops down in, comes back up over the mountains, and then it comes down and comes along the back of the mountains up in here and around, and provides water down into Virginia City, and actually at that time was lead pipes, and shortly after converted to iron piping. Water pressures, as I mentioned, because of the drop, were significant. So even today, we have to use fire trucks to slow down the pressure that the water creates in the hydrants. So the factors of when the fire occurred are a number of different things. So it comes to October 26, 1875. There's no pictures known taken of the fire itself. I've never found any photographs that show the fire in progress. There are a number of verbal, like newspaper articles and that sort of thing that are available. There was one of the first ones was from a paper in San Francisco, and then later, and shortly a few days later, another one out of a paper in Chicago, but was minimal coverage. And the thing that always has kind of fascinated me is that at the time, if this fire is 1875, The camera is for normal usage is pretty much perfected by about 1851. So why don't we have any photographs? So you have to stop thinking, well, there was photographers, one in Virginia City, who of course subsequently got burned out. There were photographers in Carson. There were photography studios in Reno. It was about a 6-hour drive over from in a stagecoach or wagons or horses or what have you from, say, Truckee or whatever. And there was photographers there. Why don't we have any photographs of the fire in its massive progress? I think, just in surmising that subject, that 1875 is what? It's the height of the Comstock's mining ventures. It's the main point where the most money is being made. What would happen if you had stock in one of the mines or several of the mines in Virginia City, and you pick up the newspaper and you see a picture of 75% of the Virginia City on fire? What would be your first reaction? Well, if you had computers, you're probably immediately on your computer looking how to sell your stock in that particular mine before it drops to nothing and you make nothing out of it. But in this case, they had telegraphs. So they could get information out to people and to the East Coast, where most of their investors were located. And so I would surmise that they probably intentionally quashed any kind of photography of the fire in its actions, because you don't see anything about it until a couple of days or 3 or 4 days later in Eastern newspapers. There were, as mentioned, there were cisterns and hydrants that were in place. The water pressure was pretty decent at the time, but there were these typical strong winds from the zephyrs, and it was early in the morning. It was about 5:30 in the morning when this all comes about. The height of the population of VC and the Gold Hill area, they were, at that point in time, they're pretty much sleeping. There's not a lot of people moving around that early. The people that are moving around are the miners that are living in boarding houses or tents, shacks, whatever they're living in, getting ready to go to work for the day. And these folks would have been bumping around their rooms or what have you. Some of the shacks and boarding houses that were in, Mark Twain made a comment about, saying that they were so poorly built and they were sometimes divided strictly by, the rooms were divided by nothing more than canvasy kind of materials. And he makes a statement at one point. He says the walls in the boarding houses were so thin that you could hear the ladies in the next room changing their minds. And so, there was always a little bit of a humor about that sort of thing. So as we move on, we think about that there were 17 different volunteer fire departments in existence at the time. So how did this fire get away from that many volunteers and stations positioned between here and Silver City? Well, Silver City is 3 to 3.5 miles downhill from Virginia City, depending upon your measuring point. They were well organized, they were well staffed, but it was all volunteers. So you had pretty good equipment for that time period. You had actually the best equipment that was available for that particular era. And this was a sophisticated industrial community. So things were kind of top order for the most part around here, because there was a lot of money to put into purchasing that sort of stuff. But there was a problem with getting the people to their fire companies. So here in Virginia City alone, at different points in time, but this is mostly at the peak of the mining operations, as noted here: Virginia Engine Company, Nevada Hook and Ladder, Young America, Washoe Engine, Confidence Engine, Hand in Hand Hose, Lincoln Hose, Rooster Hose, some larger number of personnel to them, and others smaller personnel, but they were around. There's a few more here we listed down: Goodwill, Invincible, our own Neptune Hose, Rescue, Independent. Then in Gold Hill there were several more. The primary one would be Liberty Engine Company, or Liberty Hose number 1, and Liberty Engine Company was on the west side of what today would be Highway 342 through Gold Hill. And so if you look back and you see that first big piece of hand-drawn equipment that I was mentioning was restored in my garage, that weighs almost 3,000 pounds. That's as much as my Subaru weighs. And can you imagine pulling that uphill to Virginia City to go fight a fire? First, you have to get up in the morning. You have to get up in the morning, throw on your clothes. You have to get from wherever you live to that place that you are a member of as a volunteer fire department. They didn't have the fancy clothing that we have today, what we call turnout clothing. They didn't have that kind of stuff to throw on. It was whatever clothes they were wearing at the time. Did they remember to bring their coat? October, as you well know, can get pretty stiff winds and pretty cool temperatures, and maybe even some snow. Not unusual at all. So they have to get there to that, and once they get it, then they have to pull that equipment up a hill, or they have to have a bunch of people in the back to act as brakes if they're going down the hill. So there's two kinds of departments that you're dealing with. You have hose companies and you have engine companies. The engine is the one that hand pumps it, so it really isn't an engine like we think about it. It's not a gas-powered engine or diesel or any other thing. It's powered by your hands, and you pump with it. And then you have a hose company which has the hose. So the engine company would go to the fire and stand off a bit. The hose company would then come and hit the first hydrant that it comes to by the fire, and then it would run hose over to the engine, which is what the pumper thing is called. It's called an engine. And then from there, it would another hose line that would go to the fire, maybe 50, 100 feet away, whatever the case might be. So there's two different functions. This is a hose wagon or hose cart, and this is original Virginia City equipment, and you can see the hose on the back of it. And that's the hose that would be laid from the hydrant to the pumper to the fire. This is, here again, another picture of the hand pumper. These arms, the blue arms, fold down, and you get about 12 people on each side, and they start pumping the thing from the water that comes in at the back end, and then the water is pumped outward here in the two nozzles you see between the two front wheels. And this is all hand pulled. 3,000 pounds from Gold Hill pulled uphill to Virginia City. It's about the same thing as if you had to pull your Subaru up that hill. Think of just a slight incline, how difficult that can be. This is a steamer, and this is one that we had restored, and it is fully functional. You could theoretically, I guess, actually use it at a fire today, but it's quite a job to get into operation. It weighs 6,300 pounds alone itself. This is one of the firemen, typical fire guy. This is actually Alfred Doughton. Alfred Doughton kept diaries from the time he came into Virginia City in the 1860s to the 1880s, and very detailed diaries. And University of Nevada Special Collections, myself and a fellow by the name of Ron James, probably a lot of you know Ron James, he and I and a few other people were involved in retranscribing all of Alf Doughton's journals. He was the editor of the Gold Hill News. He was an active fireman with one of the fire companies. So there was a lot of departments, and you say, well, why are there so many departments? Well, there was competition because insurance companies pay for quicker response to fires. And you get there and do that, and you get money to your fire department if you are capable of doing that. We don't really see that a lot today. The fire departments are tax funded, of course, and we don't get paid by the insurance company to do that function. Rivalries would happen on the fire scenes, fist fights, stabbings, even shootings. And some of the departments were ethnically grouped. They had, and because it was easier for those guys to all get along with each other and accomplish the end job that was respected of them. So we know that at the time of the fire, we have water, we have fire departments, we have manpower, and we have actually military units in Virginia City that offered it. But many of the firefighters were also members of the military units. There was actually the beginnings of the Nevada National Guard. And so they had two functions, two duties. They would be volunteer firefighters, and they'd be volunteer military-oriented personnel. So that's kind of the scene of the situation here. So as we move into the scene itself, it's Tuesday, it's October 26th, so it's a work day. It's much like any other day. So Alfred Doughton, the picture you saw of him working or volunteering with the department, working for the Gold Hill News, the editor actually, he wrote in his diaries, says the same, meaning the weather was the same as yesterday. It was blustery. A big fire at Virginia at 6 this morning. Destroyed the whole city, mostly north of Taylor Street. Biggest fire ever known in this section. I had to run the paper mostly as the captain, and Scrimgeour were both burned out evening after paper went to press. Captain, he's referring to one of his employees at the newspaper, as well as Scrimgeour were employees, and they were both, their homes were burned. So it was a big problem for him to put the information out in the newspaper. Tuesday, October 26th at 5 a.m. But sunrise was not till 6:27. So it was dark out. So movement about in the dark without street lights to speak of, and there's much lighting out there, is difficult. It's October weather, as we mentioned, definitely windy, we know. May have been some snow on the ground also, great possibility, but I've not found any references to say that there specifically was. Nobody was moving around much. The early risers were probably preparing to work in stores or wherever, in mines, whatever. Remember, because it wasn't just about mining. This was a very sophisticated community and had a well-developed retail-based business, restaurants, very fine restaurants, doctors, lawyers, you name it. This was not much different than Reno or Carson is today. The fire starts in a small single-story lodging house. It was on the north end of A Street, a little bit behind, well, it was behind or above, I guess you could say, the courthouse, and a little bit to the north of it. It was owned by a lady known as, her actual name was Kate Shea, but she was known as Crazy Kate, and for who knows what, you know. You could probably address or attach that moniker there to a lot of us that live here in Virginia City, probably. It was the result of two miners that, as best we know, two miners that got into kind of a row of some sort, apparently drunken, or there must have been something wrong with them. They were into some sort of a fight. Maybe they'd been up all night, don't really know. But they knocked over apparently a coal oil lantern or lamp, and that's what started the fire. And remember, these buildings were single wood construction. There was no insulation in these things. The wood was rough cut, wasn't very thick at all, and so it would burn pretty quickly once caught on fire. So it's 5:15 in the morning. At the time, how do you notify firemen? The fire alarm bells and the mine whistles begin to blow. That's how they notified firefighters, volunteers, if there was a fire of significance. They would ring bells, and the mine whistles would begin to blow and raise the alarm about a fire. And what do we have today now? We still have in many communities, particularly if you're from back east, you'll recognize that the volunteer departments are summoned, of course, mostly now by pagers, but they usually have a fire alarm or a siren type of device that sounds off to warn you of emergencies, fires, and what have you. Now our legislature, in this particular legislature today, 2023, is looking to outlaw the use of those bells and whistles. And there's big concern as to whether or not we'll be able to use those, because we still use them in Virginia City, but we do have pagers. But so that's a concern. So a few people pay heed to the alarms because they would sound them for various and sundry reasons. The wind is blowing hard, and when the wind blows hard, it's sometimes difficult to hear people talking or even a car drive by your house or what have you. And it's blowing upwards to 30 miles per hour, pretty typical afternoon zephyr that you would be going. These are three active firemen from the Liberty Hose Company. These are the guys that were in Gold Hill. These would have been the guys. We do know their names, and we have these photos in the museum. But these guys would have been the ones that had to jump up out of bed when they heard the whistles or the bells, or somebody knocking on the door saying, "Hey, there's a fire in Virginia City. You guys better get up." There's no policeman to run around and tell you to get up and get going. So they would have hauled that equipment up the hill to Virginia City that we spoke of earlier. Here's some other ones, younger guys, typical photographs taken by a photographer in Virginia City by the name of Beale. And he got burned out. Beale's photography studio was burned out because it was in the center portion of town. This is Monumental Engine Company, and it's housed down in the mid part of town. This is a photograph in the before 1875. And you can see you have a hose wagon here. You've got a pumper device here. It's kind of hard to see it right in front of what's called the Scholl and Roberts gunsmith store. It's with the men on it. It's another pumping device, and the hose. And it's a lot of people. There's a lot of people involved with this, and most of these departments had lots of people. But remember, they had to bail out of bed, get dressed, get there. These uniforms they have on is not what they would have been wearing at a fire. These were ceremonial uniforms, ceremonial for parades primarily, and that sort of thing. Here's another one of the fire stations in Virginia City at that time, with the bell tower on top. And you would have seen, you would have heard those bells would have been ringing, because they would have had a man stationed inside there 24 hours a day that would live in the station to make notifications. Divide Hose Company was up on what's known as the Divide, or the dividing area between Virginia City and Gold Hill. This particular department building had this kind of equipment. You see here a hand-drawn hose cart, and the other one can either be hand-drawn or horse-drawn, but it was primarily hand-drawn. There was not much in the way of horse-drawn equipment. This is hose. It's about 1,000 feet of hose that's on here, 800 to 1,000 if it fits, and that's heavy. One roll of that hose would probably weigh 60 pounds anyway, if not more. It's a very heavy material. This is the one in Gold Hill, the Liberty Engine Company that we've seen the pictures of the people, of the guys from. You notice the bell tower up on the top here, and it is this thing fell down due to snow load. This particular building collapsed from snow load in the early 50s, about 1951 or 52, and but the tower was saved, and I didn't put a picture in here of it, but that bell tower is actually on a monument that sits on this very location today. You may have seen it if you come up from Carson City, drive up to Virginia City, it'll be on your right-hand side, right by the railroad tracks. This looking inside, and here's this big pumper that is now in the Fireman's Museum. This little hose wagon, hose cart here, also is in the museum and sits behind the pumper. And this one is the one that had, that we call it hand drawn, because it's never horse drawn, but it has hose on it. It is in the museum also. We even have this sign up at the top that says Liberty. The original sign is also in the Fire Museum. So here's these old guys, and it's kind of interesting. You look at these people, and you can kind of look into their face and go, yeah, that they were hard-working people. That was a difficult time at that time. Here's some old boy with a long white beard, and it looks like he's probably got a cigar sticking out of his mouth there. These guys were tough people. So 2 fire companies are housed a mere block away from where this fire starts. The volunteers, they say, have to get there first. The wind starts moving the fire from one structure to the next and pushing the flames, and the cinders are blown about. And think about some of these fires that have occurred in California, where these wildland fires that move so quickly that you just can't even get ahead of it. They began skipping from building to building. They were built. It was the fire was going faster and faster. Everybody has to try to pull their equipment uphill to the fire, so it's taking time to get there. While that's happening, the fire is moving from building to building, and then it gets to a point where it's threatening the courthouse itself. The Territorial Enterprise newspaper of the 27th, the next day, which would be the local newspaper, as it described it, and you can see here, is almost instantly the column of fire that was at first seen to arise began to assume the form of a pyramid, which is typical. The base of this pyramid rapidly extended into the sides of houses in all directions, the glass falling in showers from the windows to give ingress to the flames. Structure after structure burst out in sheets of fire more rapidly than could be counted or noted down. Businesses scurried about trying to save products in their stores. They had stock in their stores of whether they were selling paper goods or they were selling stoves, whatever. They're trying to save their businesses the best they can. The wind actually begins to pick up during the day a little bit more, and it's getting stronger. Some of the buildings that were of brick, and even the wooden ones, as the walls fell and the roofs crashed in, you can imagine the noise and the amount of noise as building after building is crashing down. Wooden beams, some of these, in a building that our family owned for a long time, it's always interested me that the floor joists are rough cut 3 inches wide by 12 inches height and 12 feet long. Today you get a 2x4 or a 2x8 or 10 is what, about 1 3/4 inches in thickness, and then however wide. So these were a full 3 inches in thickness, and these things come down, and you can get hurt getting hit by something like that, get killed. The noise is terrible. There's men yelling. There's women and children crying and wailing. There's people dragging salvaged belongings and trying to stay clear of the fire advance. There's people that were seen trying to drag these wood fire stoves, the kitchen stoves that you've all probably seen in pictures in antique shops and what have you, trying to drag them out of their house, because those were valued pieces of equipment for someone to have in a home. The sheriff's prisoners in the jail, which was in the courthouse, had to be moved 3 different times because of the way the fire spread. And they'd move them one place, and that would have to be spread. They'd have to be taken out of there and moved someplace else because the fire would spread and consume where they were. Many of the fire companies, Eagle Engine Company Firehouse, was destroyed very early on. Many residences and business structures being lost one after the other. You just could not get in front of this fire, or what is referred to as pinching the fire off by going up the sides of it and trying to move in on it. It moved too fast. Equipment didn't move that fast. People didn't move that fast. The fire lads positioned and repositioned again with their equipment, trying to evade the fast-moving fire, and at the same time trying to put the fire out. The fire ultimately consumes nearly 75% of the town. So if we look at the map here, we can see this is the shaded area is the general perimeter of the fire of October 26, 1875. Taylor Street, well, maybe to give you a point of reference, you see C Street running horizontally across the screen, and you see Union Street moving vertically up and down on the screen. At the corner of C and Union Street is the Bucket of Blood Saloon. That'd give you a kind of a reference point. That's the next street down to the left is Taylor Street and C Street. That's where that flashing yellow and red light hangs over the intersection that you see if you come through Virginia City. So the fire extends a little bit to the south of Taylor Street in several locations as seen, but mostly moves to the north. And why is that? Which way does the wind blow? From the southwest, coming from that upper left corner of the map, going to the lower right corner of what's on the screen. And you can see that that's just exactly how it moved in that direction and spreads out east and west, sort of. That is the area from that North Street or Carson Street over to the Taylor Street. That's the main portion of the community. That's where the primary businesses are all located, whether it be clothing stores or grocery stores or hardware stores or whatever you name it is there, and they're all destroyed. And the homes are interspersed all over the community. So you see that the size of that fire is significant, with very little, plenty of people to work on it, but very little in the way of any kind of really super effective equipment to fight the fire. Here's another view. This map is actually one that shows the way the water system laid out in Virginia City. And the red line is essentially that area where the fire consumed the most stuff. It was spread out, of course, a little more. So what's within these borders? As we mentioned, homes, businesses, lumberyards, foundries, blacksmiths, hotels, boarding houses. So where do they live? Doctors, lawyers, mines, mills. The Ophir mine, one of the primary mines on the Comstock, the Consolidated Virginia mine. These are the ones that are owned by Mackey, Fair, Flood, O'Brien, the big guys in the mining business. Many other people that left here that made some money here and moved to California, that actually renamed towns after their names that were founded in California. Milling operations that milled the ore that the mines took out. There was over 100 different mining operations here at that time. Assayer office, the Virginia and Truckee Freight Depot on E Street, which was loaded with freight, was totally destroyed. In that building were the offices of the V&T, So all of their records, timesheets, freight manifests, equipment lists, and schedules for their personnel, and the train barn next door where the train is placed in the night to rest until morning while it schedules its next moves. Those things are all destroyed. They were gone. The Ophir mine, which was directly across from the V&T depot on E Street, lost 1,000 cords of wood. So if you use wood today in your home and you buy a cord of wood, 2 cords of wood to take you through the winter, and you think about how much space that takes up in your backyard or by the garage or wherever you actually put that, and then try to imagine 1,000 cords of wood, 1,000 cords of wood. And if you were a lumber yard or you have any feel for it, 400,000 board feet of lumber there that were destroyed. The Consolidated Virginia mine down on L Street lost all of its buildings. And its value factor was $1,311,000. So what does that mean in today's dollars? If you have to multiply $1,311,000 by 24 to get the value factor of what it would be today. Those dollars, $1,311,000,000 is today's dollars. So if you divide that number by 24, it'll tell you what the losses were for just that one mining company. Look at this picture. Imagine that somewhere in Virginia City. I mean, you don't really see anything modern in that picture, except the lines, the power lines and that sort of thing. But we had power here in 1887. But of course, the fire was in 75, and there were the power poles existed to some degree, but they were for telegraph purposes. So if you exclude the power lines that you see, the house construction style would be very much similar to what would have been here at that time. Here's one guy trying to put water on this fire, and look what's behind this place. Visualize that. If you close your eyes and you think about what in Virginia City was burning, and that, can you imagine the heat that fire, that the size of that fire is putting out? Even just the heat from that one structure that you see on the screen. Imagine how hot that would have to be. I just, and that's the kind of conflagrations that they saw in the last couple of years up in the Sierra. The heat, it moves so fast. It's like having a piece of wood laying next to a fire and it catches on fire. It doesn't even have any direct flame impingement. This is a picture, not a photograph. It's a depiction of a major city back east. It may have been the Great Chicago Fire, which had actually happened prior to the Great Fire in Virginia City. And look at how it's encompassed everything. And that's exactly what happened in Virginia City. And if you close your eyes and you think about it, you go, wow, what, who knows how many lives were lost in the Chicago Fire. But in Virginia City, oddly enough, there were very few lives lost. This is another one of the pieces of equipment that we dealt with. The fire was so hot, the applied water instantly turns to steam and has little or no effect on the fire. And I've seen that happen on fire scenes. As soon as you put water on it, it'll turn to steam. But sometimes it's so hot that it doesn't get to the fire as water. Halfway between the hose and the nozzle and the fire, it turns to steam and has little or no effect. The firefighters, they were driven back at every advance they tried to make on the fire. St. Mary's Catholic Church was threatened and actually did lose its roof. Mackey was implored, but concerned with it, but not getting it into the mines was his big concern. If the mines burn, if the fire gets into the mines, we are definitely doomed. We can rebuild the church. We can rebuild all the retail structures. We can build the mining offices and the railroad. We can redo all that. But if it gets into the mines, then we're all out of business. Absolutely. The many of the mines, though, were destroyed, but some of them were actually saved, and they were able to continue working. By 11 a.m. that morning, the fire had destroyed the central portion of Virginia City. By 2 p.m., except for some spot fires, flames had been pretty much extinguished, or they'd let the fires burn out, and they would creep around. The fire would creep and burn piles of stuff, and so you can imagine a lot of smoke occurring. The fire lasted all that night and into the next morning before things were starting to settle down. So October 25th went all day and into the night, and then the next day you still have smoldering fires going on. And these guys are working nonstop that whole time. All these volunteer guys trying to save businesses. And I have a diary of a guy who was working in the building that we owned for a long time. And he was on top of that building, which fortunately was south of C Street. And they were throwing sand, primarily sand and dirt, on any embers that came on that on that night, or that day that fire was close to that particular building on the corner of C and Taylor Streets. There was a little bit of a rain that helped quell a little bit of it, but not enough to make any difference. This was one of the chief officers that was involved in dealing with that of an engine company. You see that here again, these are not firefighting togs that he's wearing because he's got a tie on. I've never been asked to go to a fire with a tie on, but so you know they're all ceremonial type equipment. The Gold Hill News later printed and said, simply the ground that the insatiate element in all its mad fury could not destroy. And what that's referring to is that almost immediately they began cleaning up and places started to rebuild, put their things in the tents and what have you. The homes of John Mackey and Judge John Rising, who was the district court judge, were destroyed. This is what was, all of these buildings were destroyed. And this isn't all of them. This is just a listing of some of the more obvious ones. There were livery stables, saloon, county buildings. The courthouse was destroyed. The Miners Union Hall, which would have had all the records, the work records of all the miners that were in the Union. Catholic and Episcopal churches, first and third ward schools. There were there were actually 11 different schools in the town, but there were 4 county, if you owned, or city owned schools. There was first ward, second, third, and fourth ward schools. Fourth ward, of course, still standing at the south end of town. If you ever get a chance to go into that museum, do it. It's in the building. It's great. It's really cool. All of Chinatown was destroyed. The V&T depot and the buildings, the records, the freight, most of the town's fire equipment was even destroyed as an end result. Martial law had to be declared due to riots and pilferage. All the liquor stores and saloons were prohibited from selling liquor. The rumors about the fire were that there were 5 men killed trying to set fires to schoolhouses, determined to be false. That 3 men were killed by falling walls, turned to be a rumor. 3 Chinese women burned to death, totally false. Most of the city prominent citizens were killed, not at all. Confirmed injuries and deaths. A man was caught trying to set fire to hoisting works on one of the mines during the fire. but he was unsuccessful and it did not burn. V&T losses were enormous. The V&T lost its structures in Virginia City, the freight that was on the depot, all of the future freight that you and your business had delivered to Gold Hill Depot to be put on the train to take other wares, all destroyed. The V&T business offices were destroyed, all their records, schedules, time cards, you name it, totally gone. So I think trying to put a business back together after you've had a total loss like that. And there was no Office Depot in the area to get more pencils and paper. So that was a problem. So who came to rescue the town? The mighty Virginia and Truckee Railroad. The recovery was immediate relief. Freight wagons, trains, clothing, blankets, provisions, materials came from San Francisco, Sacramento, Carson City, Reno, Nevada City, and 100 other towns. V&T free transportation out of VC for refugees to go to Carson or get to Reno and stay there. Free freight for initial rebuilding materials. The V&T brought it to you for free. Where are you going to find a deal like that? Within 60 days, B Street, C Street, and D Streets were starting to see new buildings already arise from the ashes. By another 18 months, nearly everything had been rebuilt to a functional point in the community. Think of that, 18 months. I don't think we could do that today even. So you can imagine the flurry of work that was going on. From Taylor north to Carson, most structures date from 1876 today. So if you're looking to see what was what, from where the street light is, Taylor Street, from Taylor south to the divide structures date back to as far as 1862, some of them. From A Street east, 9 blocks, virtually everything was totally destroyed and wiped clean. Picture of devastation of these wildland fires that we mentioned about in California. Think of what you've seen with the pictures on TV of what that was like. And that's what it looked like in Virginia City. Here's an example of that. This is from the fires last year in California, over by Paradise and some of those towns. Look at that. I mean, there was some reports that you could see the smoke from the Virginia City fire in 1875 from Washoe Lake, from Truckee. You'd see it rising in the air, and what a terrible situation. So the volunteer stuff came from area. Insurance programs that were in place were largely denied. Nobody got paid hardly anything. The volunteer system was doomed, and the volunteer system was blamed because of the spread of the fire and their inability to deal with the event of that magnitude, even with as many fire museum or departments that we had. That whole concept or factor relating to how or what followed the Great Fire in terms of fire service is a whole other story, and it's quite interesting how we moved forward with rebuilding fire departments and putting things back into operation, and continued effective mining and paying tax money to the federal governments into the 1880s for sure. And then it began to wane, which here again is another big story. So that brings us here pretty much to the end of the presentation. I hope that you have all enjoyed the information. If you have any particular questions, I'm usually available for people to even call me. I get questions all the time from all over the country. After having dealt with National Geographic and Smithsonian and all these big TV companies, and they'll call, Grandpa had a store in Virginia City on such and such a street. Do you have any information about him? No, I wasn't here then, but but I do get those questions. So with that in thought, thank you. Hope I was able to keep your attention through this, and I'll turn it back over to Sherilyn.
Joe, that was a wonderful talk, and there's just so much. I was really impressed. You being able to use Elf Doughton's diary, some of the quotes, and yeah, I've always wondered about the fact that there wasn't as much news, but if the employees were in fact affected, and who would be available to be able to report the news, it's you would think that there had been a lot more write-up, but it's kind of hard to find some of that. So I thought that was interesting. Was there a lot more references in Alf Doughton's diary? Because I know you were mentioning you were one of the people I knew that had worked on Alf Doughton's diaries, that went further on after like the initial couple days that helped you with your research.
There were fires. The most recent significant fire that we had in Virginia City was in 1942, and it burned around 100 buildings. But the being involved with the volunteer fire department and with being one of the founders of the Firemen's Museum, we have many of the old records that date way back into the 1870s and 60s, the registers of who were members, where they lived. I have directories that I can deal with. Alf Doughton almost always reported any significant fires in his diaries. Not any great degree of detail, but it did document that. There was another fire today at Lower Gold Hill, destroyed 2 buildings, Frank Johnson's store, and little bits like that, but not any great detail. That the Doughton's journals are extremely valuable to the history and the continuity of the community and how things happened and when they happened. To do that, had terrible writing skills, but he was very difficult to read that stuff. But yeah, I gained so much information and knowledge just from going through those diaries of Alf Doughton's. Things that really surprised me, that I go, wow, I always wondered about that, and he's telling me right now. So yeah, there's a number of really good quality books. There's, if people are thinking about what other books could I read about Virginia City, there's some stuff out there that you want to be careful about the quality of the information that you get out there, particularly the more modern ones. There's some ones that are highly touted, but they're really nothing more than a historical novel. But some of the early ones, one of my favorites has always been is a book written by a guy by the name of Smith under the auspices of the University of Nevada School of Mines. And it was used as a textbook actually from when I was in high school. And I think that might have been when I really started getting interested in it, because I have actually 3 copies of that on my shelf. And that is a very good, solid quality. And the other one is that was Mark Twain's friend, Dan DeQuille, or William Wright, is another one he wrote in 1890, and it's because it's from firsthand information. I got all kinds of that stuff that I picked up here and there to refer back to.
So Smith's one, is that the history of the Comstock mines?
Yeah, history of the Comstock lode. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Want me to show you what it looks like?
Isn't it silver cover?
Yes, it is silver and blue.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how you know it's University of Nevada.
Yeah. So I did have a question. Oh, there's a comment from Danny Vernon saying, "Thanks, Neil and Joe. Enjoyed your presentation very much." So
thank you.
Danny's a good man.
So I have a question. You were showing, like at the beginning, early on the presentation, a couple of the firefighters with their shirts, and it said LH1. So you were saying Liberty Engine, but is that Liberty Hose?
Yeah. So there would have been two. There would have been two. We'll call them, for a better word, we'll call them teams. 2 teams within the fire department. So Liberty Hose would be the guys that pull the hose and bring the hose to the fire. Liberty Engine would have been the guys that operate that pumper engine to pump the water. So
okay, so then even though they're under the company itself, the teams would then have their, I guess, different logos or whatever within it, because they're part of the different teams, like you were saying, like the hose connects to the hydrant, connects to the engine, and then another hose goes to the fire, which I thought was interesting. So I was writing my notes down.
Yeah, and today's fire departments, everybody does the same thing. They all do it together because they carry the hose with the engine that has the pump on it and that sort of thing. But so if you think of it like a military situation, you've got a squadron of guys that do this and a squadron of guys that do that and do this, that, and the other thing. And so, yeah, at Liberty Engine Company and Liberty Hose Company. So they were all together there. And they, if you come up through Gold Hill on the right-hand side, right by the tracks, you'll see the monument for the Liberty Engine Company.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So now what bell is in the Firemen's Museum that's on the stand?
It's on the top of the museum, you mean?
Yeah.
It is one of the bells from one of the mines that because it had been taken off, and when we reopened the thing, we got one of these bells that was within the community someplace. I don't even remember now, but then we installed it up there. In probably 6 or 8 years ago, the device that holds the bell there, the cradle, I guess you would call it, that holds it there, broke from age when it was being rung one time, and we had to have new cradle arms manufactured or cast back in Pennsylvania. And actually had, and oddly enough, they had the forms for that very brand of bell that so we got the exact same, just a modern ones, better quality material actually.
Wow, that's impressive. Because sometimes that's either the wood framing or the that is the weak points of the bells. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the cradle arms. Yeah.
Okay. Well, gosh, you gave us so much information.
Yeah.
I definitely know I'm going to want to have you come back again and maybe do a program at the Historical Society, because I know you are considered an expert dealing with so much of Virginia City's history with the fires and everything you've worked on through the years. Neil, do you have any
I've got a question. One of them to compare the fires of 1875 and the one where we lost the International Hotel. What were the improvements, and how in the world could you go ahead and keep something that was that big and right in the center of town from taking the whole damn town out again?
Well, it was 1914 when the International Hotel burned in its final status. Of course, it burned in the Great Fire, the 1875 fire. But by 1914, it had been rebuilt and repositioned. But then in 1914, the remains of the building, which was not particularly in any significant use at that time, burned. But you have a better fire department. You have equipment, and you have brick buildings. After the fire, they began building many of the things in brick. And they were considered to be fireproof. But the other things they did, if you've noticed, you see these on the fronts of some of the stores, you have these iron doors that trifold back into the side of the building. Those were two purposes. Security was one, but it was also the idea was that it would block the fire from being able to break the windows and come into your structure, into your building. So there was more water available. Two, that was not during a big wind. The international fire, and three, there was more equipment and personnel available to come and help from outlying districts as well. Same thing with the 1942 Divide Fire. We had equipment that came up here from Dayton, Silver City, Carson City to help with that fire, because there was a big concern that it was going to move right into the main section of Virginia City in 1914.
I got one other, well, actually I have two, a request on, maybe elaborate a bit on all of the marker signs for historical, the exact spot that you and Hugh Roy Marshall had put up. You built them and he paid for them. And then I always love stories. And I'd like you to close on out with the story of the robber and the goat.
The robber and the goat?
Yeah, the one where he was hitting the goat in the head to try and get him.
I don't think I'm familiar with that, what you're referring to. I'm not, or maybe I'm not got enough clues yet.
Well, I'll go ahead and I'll take a photo of the research that talks about the burglar that was in the house.
Oh, you're talking about me?
Yeah, I'm talking. Well, these are just. This would have happened nowhere else but in Virginia City, and it was a great story. You bet.
It was when I was working with the Carson City Sheriff's Department, and I just gotten out of court and was in not a patrol car, but a plane car, headed back to the station out of court, and had a radio call of a burglary in progress up in Kings Canyon. And so myself and the guy that was with me headed up there, and as we pulled into the area where it was kind of a rural sort of area, not right in the middle of town, and we pulled up, and as we did, we could see a guy peeking out the window, and so we figured that's the bad guy. So we got out of the car, and my partner goes around to the backside, and I was sneaking around on the front, going over to a door and trying to keep track of this guy. And all of a sudden, something hit me upside on my side and knocked me for a loop. Actually, did a somersault and knocked me for a loop. And I thought, oh, guy! All I could think of was this guy had a partner, and he caught me off guard and knocked me down. And I kind of got together and I got hit again. And as I did, I'm looking around and I see it's a huge goat, probably the biggest goats that I've ever seen. This thing was huge. Well, maybe it was because I was laying on the ground and he wasn't, but he knocked me down again, and then I fell down beside of a wood pile, and I picked up a big thing of wood, a big limb of wood, and as he came at me again, I hit him upside the head with the piece of wood, thinking that would make him go away, but apparently he liked that. So yeah, because goats want to butt something. So if this guy's going to help me out in the fun, yeah, I'll come after him again. So I finally got up and got away from the goat, and then the owner showed up, and we went in the house to talk, and he left the door open, and the goat came in the house with us too, and so yeah, so nobody was hurt. We did catch the bad guy. And he didn't get away with anything, so all was good. It just it was my pride that was hurt most, I think. I think I was a little sore for a day, but that's it.
These are just great Nevada stories. So.
It is. That is.
Yeah. Tell us about those markers, because you went to a lot of trouble to put them up.
Oh yeah, I'd always had this dream, not dream per se, but this idea that I would love to see historical markers all over Virginia City, to give people to go almost any place in town and find a marker that would say this has happened here or over there. Or what you're looking at is where this mine building, because the buildings are all gone, and so we the thing I have to do tonight is about what happened to all the old buildings. So I thought, gosh, I would love to be able to do that, but I priced it out, and it was going to be about $200 to buy a steel pole, sign pole, and the metal to put the thing on, and to print the material out on an 18 by 24 sign, and it was going to be expensive. So I know Hugh Roy pretty well, and I've known him for years. And so I was telling him about my idea one time, and he goes, well, how much do you think it would cost? And I said, well, I don't know, for for maybe the first 40 ones, maybe around $3,000. I could probably, do them and volunteer my time and information to put them together and print them out and then put it in and get them put up. And he said, well, okay, so how about if I give you the $3,000 and you just document wherever you use it? And I got me a high school kid to help me put the posts in the ground. So I let him dig, and we mixed the concrete in the back of my pickup truck. And we put the post all up and down there, all up and down D Street, which is the street downhill below C Street. And if you start at the north end of town, you'll see them. There's a few of them that have been torn down, destroyed, blown down, but maybe 4 or 5 is all. And they've got to get put back up. And so we did all these. And usually they must all have a document, so many words that explains it. And then under it is a photograph of what you would be looking at if standing in that location. And so they're down there. Actually, I eventually put them down as far as the farthest one south is in Silver City, and it's on the original old fire department in Silver City. And so people, if they want to look through those, and they're always looking for like walking or driving tours, the best way is to walk D Street, and they go from there down to the truck route, from the north end of town to the truck route, to document this stuff. And then I tried to get people in their businesses. I said, if you'll do all of the research for yourself and give me the research, I'll make the sign for you and put it on the front of your building. You know how many takers I got on that? 0.
Oh, we're crying.
Yeah, nobody was interested in doing that, or maybe they just didn't have the wherewithal or the ability to do the research and that sort of thing. So there's been some other ones. We put them on the courthouse and some other businesses in town that, like the roasting house. We did one for the roasting house coffee shop thing, and so got, I hornswoggled them for a dozen lattes or something like that in exchange for putting one up there, and I hope to put up more as I get time. They're really important to document what's happened in this community.
So there is absolutely no reason that the entire town doesn't know who Joe Curtis is.
And that it's not really problematic, but it's weird. People will say, I got your phone number from the guy in the such and such business, or a waitress in the restaurant, or the bartender said, yeah, because I actually produced phone directory for Virginia City for about 6 or 7 years, changed it every couple of years. And so they still have those directories around, and the phone numbers are still the same. So, because we didn't have, in Virginia City, we didn't have dial telephones until 1976.
Wow. You still had a switchboard up there, didn't you?
Yeah. When I was overseas in the Army, in order to get a phone call to call home, to either when my wife was staying here with my mom, either to call her or my wife or my mom, I had to get on the military operator and explain to them how to go, need to call San Francisco. And then I'll have to tell San Francisco what the process is to get to Virginia City, because it's not just to connect it up. It's a convoluted process to get here. So,
well, Joe, we cannot thank you enough, and I'm just going to shut down here. I know Sherry wants a couple of comments, and we also have Amanda that needs to tell you all about the coming attractions.
Well, you can tell my love for the community, and anytime I can and help to impart the information into other people's heads, I'm all for it.
You're the guy.
Yeah. Joe, it was great. Thank you so much. It was so informative, and I'm so glad Neil brought up about the signs that you've worked on and just all the things you've done through the years. So it was really informative. So
thank you. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. Well, thank you everybody for attending today, and I'll send it back to Amanda. And as always, thank you Washoe County Libraries for helping us put on our High Noon series. So back to you, Amanda.
Absolutely. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Sherry, Neil, and Joe, for presenting this wonderful historical look at Virginia City. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.